Imagine this. The sand is so soaked with blood it has turned black. Horses scream like people. Men slip on intestines. And in the middle of it all, a teenage king whose body is already rotting alive raises a shattered banner and charges, straight into an army 50 times larger than his own. Here's the impossible question. How does a force of barely 500 knights annihilate 26,000 hardened warriors in a single day, and leave the greatest Muslim commander of the age fleeing for his life? You think you know this story. You don't. Because the truth of Montgisard is darker, more desperate, and more brutal than anything you've ever heard. And before this is over, you're going to smell the blood, feel the fear, and understand why men on both sides would remember this day as a miracle and a nightmare. Now listen closely, because 5 moments are coming that will change how you see medieval warfare forever. In a few minutes, you'll watch a 16-year-old leper king hide his disease just long enough to ride into battle, knowing the impact might literally tear his flesh apart. You'll see Saladin the Magnificent, make one mistake so arrogant that his own bodyguards will later beg him to run. You'll hear the true story of a knight who keeps fighting after his jaw is smashed sideways, using his teeth to cling to his reins. You'll witness a charge so violent that eyewitnesses swear the ground shook like an earthquake. And finally, you'll learn what happened after the battle, the part history textbooks quietly bury because it's too uncomfortable to celebrate. But first, before swords clash, before bones snap, you need to understand just how hopeless this situation really was. Because this was not supposed to be a battle. This was supposed to be an execution. You are standing in the kingdom of Jerusalem in the year 1177. And it is dying. The land is cracked and dusty, baked by a sun that feels like punishment. Castles stand isolated like gravestones. The population is thin, exhausted, constantly watching the horizon. Every man knows the truth, even if no one wants to say it out loud. Saladin is coming. And this time, there will be no escape. Saladin ibn Ayyub is not just another warlord. He is not reckless. He is not desperate. He is patient, disciplined, terrifyingly intelligent. He has spent years tightening a noose around the crusader states, cutting supply lines, absorbing rivals, building an army that stretches from Egypt to Syria. And now, finally, he moves. 26,000 men march north from Egypt. Veteran cavalry. Archers who can put an arrow through an eye slit at full gallop. Infantry hardened by desert warfare. Men who have watched cities burn and never flinched. Their banners darken the horizon like a storm front. In Jerusalem, panic spreads like disease. Because the man who should be leading them is a boy. And worse. That boy is dying. King Baldwin IV is 16 years old, and his body is betraying him. Leprosy has already eaten away his nerves. He can't feel pain in his hands. His skin is numb, pale, unreliable. He knows exactly what this means, because he has watched others rot from the same disease. Fingers fall off. Noses collapse. Flesh dies while the mind stays awake. And Baldwin knows he will not live long enough to grow old. But right now, none of that matters. Because Saladin has crossed the border. The Crusader army should number several thousand. Instead, Baldwin can scrape together barely 500 knights. Not soldiers. Knights. Men in heavy armor, yes, but vastly outnumbered, scattered across garrisons, many of them young, some barely trained, others already resigned to death. Most of the kingdom's forces are in the north. Others are guarding castles. There is no time to recall them. And Saladin knows it. This is the moment he has waited for. He believes Jerusalem is undefended. He believes Baldwin is weak. He believes this will be a campaign, not a fight. So he lets his army spread out. Forage. Loot. Relax. That decision will cost him thousands of lives. But Baldwin doesn't know that yet. Right now, you are Baldwin. You wake before dawn. Your hands feel strange, heavy, distant, like they belong to someone else. Servants help strap your armor on because your fingers can't properly grip the buckles anymore. You don't tell them why. You don't tell anyone how bad it's getting. Because a king who looks weak is already dead. Your advisors argue in hushed tones. Some want to retreat to Jerusalem and wait for a siege. Others whisper a word no king ever wants to hear. Surrender. But Baldwin shakes his head. If Jerusalem falls, the kingdom dies. If the kingdom dies, everything his father and grandfather bled for becomes dust. So he makes a decision that borders on madness. He will attack Saladin. Not with an army. With what is left. As Baldwin rides out, you can feel the fear in the men around you. Horses sense it too, snorting, stamping, rolling their eyes. One night, a veteran named Balian of Ibelin watches the king closely. He knows about the leprosy. He's seen Baldwin's hands tremble when he thinks no one is looking. And Balian understands something terrible. This boy is riding into a battle he does not expect to survive. But Baldwin's face is calm. Almost serene. Because for him, the future is already stolen. All that remains is how he will be remembered. They march fast. Too fast. Armor chafes. Sweat pools inside helmets. The air tastes like iron and dust. Scouts bring back worse and worse news. Saladin's army is everywhere. Their numbers are impossible. Men begin to pray. Others joke too loudly, the way people do when they're trying not to scream. Then, suddenly, the road opens. Ahead lies Montgisard, a low, scrub-covered ridge near the coast. And beyond it, the enemy. But something is wrong. Saladin's army is not formed. It's scattered. Units are spread out. Camps half broken. Horses grazing. Men unarmored. They didn't expect this. Saladin believed Baldwin was hiding behind walls. He believed the crusaders were paralyzed with fear. He believed wrong. Still, even disorganized, the Muslim army dwarfs the crusaders. 26,000 to maybe 500. Any rational commander would turn back. Baldwin does not. Instead, he orders the true cross brought forward. This matters more than you might realize. The true cross is not just a relic, it is the psychological heart of the crusader army. A piece of wood believed to be from the cross of Christ himself. Men have died defending it. Men have gone mad trying to touch it. When Baldwin orders it raised, something changes. Knights dismount. They kneel in the dirt. Grown men weep openly. Some kiss the ground. Others kiss the cross, pressing lips toward slick with sweat and tears. This is not strategy. This is faith turned into a weapon. Baldwin rides among them, his horse stepping carefully, almost reverently. He speaks quietly. Not a grand speech. Not shouting. Just enough for those closest to hear. He tells them there will be no retreat. He tells them they are already dead, unless they fight like men who have nothing left to lose. And then he does something no one expects. He dismounts. The king of Jerusalem kneels in the dirt beside his knights. A leper king. Praying for strength his body no longer has. And somewhere, far across the field, Saladin finally realizes what is happening. Scouts arrive breathless. The Franks are advancing. Not hiding. Not retreating. Advancing. Saladin is confused. Then irritated. Then amused. He orders his commanders to form up, but it takes time. Too much time. His army is stretched thin from raiding. Units are miles apart. And the crusaders are moving fast. Too fast. Now, pause here. Because what happens next is the moment where everything should fall apart. This is where the crusader charge should fail. This is where 500 men should be swallowed by 26,000. This is where history expects a massacre. But instead, something goes terribly, horribly wrong. And in the next moments, you are going to hear the sound that witnesses said they never forgot. The sound of armored knights hitting flesh at full speed. The sound that made veterans vomit. The sound that made Saladin himself believe, just for a heartbeat, that God might not be on his side. But before that impact, before the charge, you need to meet three men. Because Montgisard is not just about armies. It is about people. And the first is Baldwin himself. At 16, his face is already pale, his features sharp. He hides the worst of the disease with gloves and armor, but the pain, or rather, the absence of it, is constant. He cannot feel his hands. Which means if he grips his reins too hard, he may not realize until blood runs down his wrists. He knows this battle might tear open his skin. He knows infection could kill him even if the enemy does not. He rides anyway. The second man is a crusader knight named Hugh of Tiberias. Hugh has fought Muslims before. He has lost friends. He is practical, not particularly religious, and deeply aware of how bad this looks. When he sees the Muslim numbers, his mouth goes dry. But when the true cross is raised, something inside him snaps. Later, he will say he felt like he was already dead, and that made him fearless. The third man is on the opposite side. Ayyubid Emir Taqi al-Din, Saladin's nephew. Young, ambitious, confident. He believes this is beneath him. A mop-up operation. He has not bothered to fully armor. That arrogance will cost him dearly. Now the crusaders mount up. The ground trembles. 500 knights form into a wedge, tight, brutal, designed to punch through lines like a hammer through bone. Baldwin takes position at the front. Yes. The king rides first. If he dies where everyone can see him. The banner lifts. The signal is given. And they charge. You hear it before you see it. A deep, rolling thunder. Hooves striking earth in unison. Armor clashing. Men screaming prayers. And as they crest the ridge, Muslim soldiers look up from their camps and freeze. Because the Franks are not slowing. They are accelerating. What happens in the first impact is so violent that chroniclers struggle to describe it. The crusader wedge slams into unprepared infantry and cavalry alike. Bodies explode backward. Horses collapse, legs shattered. Men are crushed under hooves before they can even scream. Hugh of Tiberias lowers his lance and feels it punch through a man's chest, the resistance like hitting wet cloth, and then the sudden emptiness as it exits. Another knight's sword cleaves a skull so hard it sticks. Ayyubid archers try to form up, but they are ridden down before they can loose a second volley. This is not a battle. It is an avalanche. But here's the thing. This is where it should end. Because the Muslim army begins to close in. Numbers start to matter. And in the next minutes, the Crusaders will face the moment where hope collapses. Where the miracle seems to die. And where King Baldwin will make a choice that no one expected. And when he does, men will follow him straight into hell. That's where we'll pick up next. You think this is where the story turns into legend. It doesn't. Not yet. Because after that first impact, after the scream of splintering wood, the crunch of ribs under hooves, the shock of Muslim soldiers realizing too late that this is not a raid, the battlefield doesn't pause. It tightens. Like a fist. The crusader wedge punches deep, yes. Deep enough to split Saladin's forward elements almost clean in half. But wedges don't win wars by themselves. They stall. They slow. They get swallowed. And now that's exactly what starts to happen. You are one of the knights in Baldwin's line. Your horse is lathered with sweat, foam dripping from its mouth. Your arm aches from repeated blows, your shoulder numb from impact. The smell is overwhelming, blood, shit, hot metal, crushed grass. It gets into your mouth, coats your tongue. You taste iron every time you breathe. All around you, the Muslim army is waking up. Not panicking, adjusting. Horns sound. Shouted orders ripple outward. Cavalry begin to wheel in from the flanks. Archers finally get space to draw and fire. Arrows fall like rain. They hiss past your ears. One slams into a knight beside you, punching through the gap at his armpit. He makes a sound like he's trying to breathe through water and slides off his saddle, boots still caught in the stirrups, dragged screaming until his head hits a rock and goes quiet. This is where the math asserts itself. 26,500. The Crusaders are surrounded on three sides now, hemmed in by their own momentum. And Saladin, finally fully aware of the threat, rides forward. He is calm. Too calm. Saladin is not a screamer, not a charger. He watches. He calculates. He sees that the Frankish charge has overextended. And he smiles. Because this is the moment he's trained for. He orders his heavy cavalry to encircle. Not crush. Encircle. Let the Franks exhaust themselves. Let their horses tire. Then finish them. From his perspective, this is textbook warfare. A brave but foolish enemy throwing everything into a single blow. And for a few terrible minutes. It looks like Saladin is right. The crusader wedge slows. Lances shatter. Knights abandon them for swords and maces. Horses stumble over corpses. Formation breaks down into brutal pockets of fighting. A knight named Gerard, barely 20, loses his helmet in a clash. An arrow slices his cheek open to the bone. Blood floods his mouth. He gags, spits, keeps swinging. Another knight takes a sword blow to the knee. His leg folds backward. He doesn't even scream, just stares, shocked, as he's trampled. The Muslims press closer. Archers now fire from all sides. Horses scream as arrows punch into flanks and necks. One collapses, throwing its rider forward into a wall of spears. And now something terrifying happens. The crusader charge stops. Completely. They are no longer advancing. They are surrounded. This is the point in every other battle where morale breaks. Where men start to look for exits that don't exist. Where someone shouts run and the word spreads like fire. You can feel it starting. The hesitation. The flicker of fear. And Saladin feels it too. He raises his hand. The signal is coming. The order that will end this. But then, something breaks the rhythm of the battlefield. Not a horn. Not a shout. A voice. A young voice. Clear. Steady. Commanding. King Baldwin. He rides to the front again, through arrows, through chaos, and rips his helmet off. This is insanity. A king exposing his face in the middle of a surrounded melee. But Baldwin does it anyway. And what the men see hits them like a punch. Because up close, the disease is impossible to ignore. His face is pale, almost waxy. His eyes are sunken. His lips are cracked. One side of his mouth doesn't move properly when he speaks. This boy should not be alive. Let alone here. Let alone leading. And Baldwin shouts, not eloquently, not beautifully, but with raw force. He tells them this is where they die. He tells them there is no retreat, no mercy, no rescue coming. He tells them that if they are to be killed today, they will be killed standing. And then he raises the banner again. Not behind the lines. Not protected. At the front. And in that moment, something psychological happens that Saladin never anticipates. The Crusaders don't see numbers anymore. They don't see strategy. They see a dying boy who refuses to kneel. And it infects them. Fear flips into rage. Despair turns into something darker. A willingness to butcher. They close ranks. They reform. Messily, imperfectly, but enough. And they surge. Not forward. Upward. Into the densest part of the Muslim line. This is not tactics anymore. This is spite. A knight named Hugh of Tiberias takes an arrow through the jaw. It punches out through his cheek, snapping teeth, tearing flesh. He screams once, then jams the arrow shaft against his breastplate, breaks it off, and keeps fighting with blood pouring down his chest. Another knight, Raymond, loses his sword. He grabs a fallen mace, so heavy it nearly wrenches his shoulder out, and starts swinging it two-handed like a farmer threshing wheat. Every hit caves in armor. You hear ribs crack like kindling. The Muslims are shocked. Not by the violence. They are used to violence. They are shocked by the refusal to die. This was supposed to be clean-up. Now it's turning into a grinder. And then Saladin makes his second mistake. He commits his elite cavalry too early. They charge in to finish the Crusaders, but the terrain betrays them. Bodies, broken wagons, dead horses, loose and churned into sludge. Their formation breaks as they enter. And the Crusaders, armored, compact, enraged, hit them head-on. Steel meets steel. Horses slam together chest to chest. Men fall, trapped under armor and hooves, screaming until the screams turn wet and quiet. This is where individual stories start to matter. On Saladin's side, an emir named Foruch is unhorsed. A Frankish knight pins him down, dagger raised. Foruch shouts for mercy in broken Latin. The knight hesitates, then sees another crusader die beside him, and drives the dagger in, over and over. Later, the knight will not remember doing it. On the crusader side, a man named Ansel collapses from exhaustion. He tries to rise. His arms shake uncontrollably. A Muslim infantryman approaches cautiously, spear leveled. Ansel looks up, laughs, spits blood, and swings his mace one last time, shattering the man's knee before a sword takes Ansel's head clean off. The battlefield has become a killing ground. And yet, despite all this, the Crusaders are still losing. Slowly, inevitably, because numbers don't care about courage. And Saladin can feel victory creeping back into his grasp. He orders fresh units forward. He tightens the ring. He prepares to end it. And this is where history almost ends differently. Because something goes wrong inside the Crusader ranks. Something small. Something human. A rumor. Someone shouts that the king is down. No one knows if it's true. But the words spread. Baldwin is dead. The effect is immediate. Knights falter. One group pulls back instinctively. Another breaks formation trying to see. And Saladin sees it. He sees the wobble. He raises his hand again. Now. Finish them. Muslim cavalry surge forward, arrows flying, sabers flashing. This is the lowest point. This is where the miracle is supposed to fail. And if you freeze the moment right here, if you cut the film, every military historian would tell you the Crusaders are finished. But then, something utterly insane happens. Something no one plans. Something that should not work. The true cross moves. A priest, terrified, shaking, steps forward with it. He should be protected. He should be behind the lines. Instead, he walks straight into the melee. The cross rises above the helmets. And Baldwin, still alive, still mounted, rides toward it. The rumor dies instantly. Men see him. Bleeding. Bareheaded. Alive. And the psychological impact is nuclear. Knights scream. Not words. Sounds. Animal. They rally around the cross like drowning men clawing at driftwood. And Baldwin does something that defies all logic. He orders a second charge. Not outward. Not to escape. Inward. Straight at Saladin's command center. This is suicide. Everyone knows it. But that's exactly why it works. Because Saladin never expects it. The Crusaders smash into the core of the Muslim army with whatever strength they have left. And suddenly, the unthinkable happens. Saladin's banner wavers. Not falls. Wavers. His guards fight desperately, but they are shocked, overwhelmed by the ferocity of men who should already be dead. Ayyubid Emir Taqi ul-Din, the same man who hadn't armored properly, is struck down, dragged from his horse, nearly killed before his guards pull him free. Saladin himself is nearly unhorsed. An arrow strikes his shield. A knight's sword slices through his saddle straps. For a moment, just a moment, panic flashes through the Muslim command. And panic at the center spreads faster than courage at the edge. Units begin to pull back instinctively. Not a rout. A hesitation. But that hesitation is fatal. Because the Crusaders feel it. They sense weakness like sharks smell blood. They push harder. And now the Muslims begin to break. Not everywhere. But enough. Enough that men start to run. Enough that formations dissolve. Enough that Saladin realizes, too late, that this battle is no longer under his control. He orders a withdrawal. A controlled one. But the order doesn't travel cleanly. Some units retreat. Others don't hear. Others refuse. And retreat turns into flight. Now imagine the scene. Thousands of men trying to escape through the same gaps. Horses colliding. Men shoved down and trampled. Crusaders hacking at backs, legs, necks. The ground slick. The air screaming. A Muslim soldier named Yusuf throws away his weapon and runs. A sword cuts his calf open. He falls. Someone steps on his hand. Bones snap. He screams for his mother before a mace caves his skull in. Saladin rides hard. His guards drag him away from the chaos, shielding him with their bodies. He escapes. Barely. And when the dust settles, the impossible has happened. 26,000 men did not die. But thousands did. Saladin's army is shattered. The crusaders, what's left of them, stand stunned, shaking, covered in blood that isn't theirs. They have won. But the cost. The cost is horrific. Bodies are everywhere. Friends unrecognizable. Armor crushed inward. Horses dying slowly, screaming. And Baldwin. Baldwin slumps in his saddle. Exhaustion hits him like a hammer. His wounds are opening. His hands bleed where he never felt the cuts. And yet, he is smiling. Because for one day, just one, he has defied fate. But the story is not over. Because what happens after the battle? What the Crusaders do next? And what Saladin learns from this defeat? Will shape everything that comes after. And that's where the darkest truths of Montgisard finally emerge. That's next. You think this is where the story slows down. Where the dust settles, the victors catch their breath, and history politely moves on. It doesn't. Because the hours after Montgisard are almost as brutal as the battle itself. The sun sinks lower, turning the field into a red-gold wasteland. Shadows stretch across corpses stacked so thick in places that the ground underneath is no longer visible. The smell becomes unbearable. Blood baked by heat. Open bowels. Split horses. Iron and sweat and fear all rotting together. Men who survived the fighting begin to shake, not from cold, but from delayed terror. Hands tremble so badly they can't unbuckle helmets. Some vomit inside their armor. Others sit down and refuse to stand again, staring blankly at nothing. This is victory. This is what it costs. You walk among the bodies. You recognize friends by fragments, an engraved sword pommel, a torn surcoat, a familiar boot. Faces are swollen, purple, caved in. Some men look asleep except for the absence of heads. Crusader priests move among the wounded, murmuring prayers, smearing oil on foreheads slick with blood. They step carefully, because one misstep could mean slipping on intestines or falling onto a spear point. And then there are the survivors on the other side. Muslim soldiers who didn't die, but didn't escape either. Some are pinned under horses, legs crushed, screaming until someone silences them. Others crawl, dragging shattered limbs, leaving dark trails in the dust. This is where the war becomes personal. Knights who spared no mercy in battle now hesitate. Some finish the wounded quickly. Others don't. A crusader named Raymond finds a young Muslim archer sobbing, clutching his shattered arm. The boy can't be more than 15. Raymond raises his sword, and stops. He lowers it. Walks away. Another knight sees this and explodes in rage, calling Raymond a traitor, driving his blade into the boy's throat. Raymond will carry that image for the rest of his life. This is the aftermath history rarely lingers on. And at the center of it all sits King Baldwin. He has dismounted. He cannot stand anymore. Servants and knights cluster around him, peeling armor away carefully, because his skin tears easily now. Every piece removed reveals more blood. Cuts he never felt. Wounds he never noticed. One knight finally breaks down and weeps openly when he sees the damage. Baldwin does not. He looks distant. Almost peaceful. He asks one question. Did we hold? They tell him yes. And only then does his head slump forward. Now, pause here. Because this feels like an ending. The miracle happened. The underdog won. The king survived. Cue the music. Roll the credits. Except Montgisard doesn't end here. Because what happens next is where the legend fractures, and where reality becomes uncomfortable. Let's go to Saladin. He rides through the night. Hard. Fast. Silent. No torches. No songs. Just the sound of hooves and the ragged breathing of men who know how close they came to dying. Saladin does not speak much. He doesn't need to. His commanders can see it on his face. Shock. Not fear. Humiliation. This was not supposed to happen. He had done everything right, on paper. But paper doesn't account for fanaticism, or despair, or a dying boy willing to gamble everything. When they finally stop, Saladin dismounts and sinks to the ground. A servant brings water. He drinks, then vomits. This matters. Because Saladin is not weak. He is sick with rage. With himself. Later chroniclers will try to soften this defeat, but make no mistake, Montgisard wounds Saladin deeply. And he learns from it. He learns never to underestimate the Franks again. Never to scatter his army so carelessly. Never to assume fear will paralyze a desperate enemy. This lesson will cost the Crusader states everything, a decade later. But right now, Jerusalem celebrates. Or tries to. Messengers ride hard, spreading the news. Saladin defeated. The kingdom saved. Church bells ring. Crowds cheer. But the mood is strange. Uneasy. Because when the knights return, they do not look like heroes. They look haunted. Covered in scars and dried blood. Some won't speak. Others can't stop speaking, replaying the battle again and again, louder each time, as if volume might drown out memory. And Baldwin. Baldwin becomes a symbol. Overnight. The leper king. The boy who faced annihilation and won. Poets will exaggerate. Preachers will sanctify. Chroniclers will polish. But Baldwin himself knows the truth. This victory has changed nothing about his body. If anything, it has accelerated his decline. In the weeks after Montgisard, his condition worsens. Wounds fester. Infection sets in. His hands grow weaker. His vision blurs. He is still king. But time is already winning. Now let's talk about something else history tends to ignore. The plan. Because Montgisard is often described as a miracle. And yes, luck played a role. Faith played a role. But this was not blind madness. There was method in the insanity. Baldwin and his commanders understood something crucial. Saladin's army, though massive, was stretched thin by raiding. Men were dispersed, horses tired, discipline relaxed. Speed and surprise were the only weapons available to the Crusaders. They didn't aim to fight the whole army. They aimed to shock it. To break cohesion before numbers could assert themselves. The true cross wasn't just spiritual, it was psychological warfare. A rallying point so powerful it allowed men to fight beyond exhaustion. And Baldwin placing himself at the front? That was deliberate. A king who hides creates doubt. A king who bleeds creates loyalty. But here's the part that almost no one talks about. The Crusaders didn't just win by charging. They won by refusing to disengage. At every point where retreat might have preserved lives, they chose escalation. This is not heroism. This is extremity. They fought like men who believed survival was impossible. And that mindset is lethal. Now, false ending number 2. Because you might think Montgisard secures the kingdom. It doesn't. In fact, it plants the seeds of disaster. Saladin retreats, but he does not forget. He spends the next decade rebuilding, refining, hardening his forces. He absorbs Montgisard into his strategic memory like a scar. The Crusaders, meanwhile, misread the lesson. They believe God will always intervene. They believe courage alone can overcome numbers. They begin to take risks they cannot afford. And Baldwin's health collapses. By his early 20s, he is nearly blind. His hands are useless. He can no longer ride properly. He is carried on a litter like a living relic. The boy who charged at Montgisard becomes a prisoner of his own body. Still king. Still respected. But increasingly sidelined. And when he finally dies in 1185, Jerusalem loses more than a ruler. It loses its spine. 3 years later, Saladin returns. This time, there is no Montgisard. This time, there is Hattin. And Hattin will erase almost everything Montgisard saved. But before we go there, before the doom, you need to understand the human cost of Montgisard itself. Because the battlefield does not disappear when armies leave. Local villagers come later. They find bodies stripped by scavengers, faces bloated, dogs and birds feeding freely. They burn what they can. They bury what they can't identify in mass pits. Bones will surface for years after, turned up by plows. Parents will tell children not to play there. On the Muslim side, families wait for men who never return. Wives become widows without confirmation. Sons grow up with only stories. On the crusader side, the kingdom is filled with survivors who wake screaming at night. Victory doesn't heal trauma. It just gives it a reason. And now that you understand the cost, the psychology, the fragile miracle, we can finally talk about the slaughter. Because there is one final phase of Montgisard that most accounts barely mention. The pursuit. And it is here, after the battle is already decided, that the killing becomes truly merciless. That's next. You think the killing stopped when Saladin fled. It didn't. In medieval warfare, the battle itself is often the least deadly part. The pursuit is where armies die. And Montgisard's pursuit was savage. As Saladin's retreat unraveled, units peeled away in every direction, some toward the coast, others inland, some simply running wherever there were no crusaders immediately in front of them. Discipline collapses faster than courage. Men throw away shields to run faster. Helmets are discarded. Swords dropped. Horses driven until their lungs bleed. And the crusaders, exhausted, wounded, half dead themselves, do something chilling. They follow. Not because it's smart. Because they're angry. Because fear has nowhere left to go. A knight named Gerard, his face still crusted with blood, one eye nearly swollen shut, rides after a cluster of fleeing infantry. His horse stumbles over a corpse but recovers. Gerard doesn't slow. He cuts down the first man from behind, the blade biting deep into the spine. The man folds forward without a sound. Another turns, hands raised, begging. Gerard doesn't hear words anymore. He swings. Later, when asked why he didn't stop, he will say, "I was afraid if I did, I'd start screaming." This is the psychology of pursuit. The crusaders are no longer fighting to survive. They are fighting to release everything they've been holding in. And the Muslim soldiers know it. Some try to surrender. Some kneel. Some simply collapse. It doesn't always help. Ayyubid cavalryman named Ibrahim is unhorsed during the flight. His leg is broken. He drags himself into a shallow ditch, pressing his face into the mud to hide. A crusader knight finds him anyway. The knight hesitates. Then he is shouting behind him, another fight breaking out. He makes a decision. Ibrahim feels the sword before he sees it. One clean stroke. Mercy, of a sort. Others are not so lucky. One group of Muslim soldiers is driven into a dry riverbed. They cluster together, trapped, surrounded. Crusaders ride the edges, cutting down anyone who tries to climb out. It lasts minutes. When it's over, the riverbed is so full of bodies that the ground underneath is invisible. And still, it keeps going. This is where numbers turn obscene. Chroniclers estimate that several thousand Muslims die not in the battle, but afterward. Not soldiers fighting back. Men running. Men hiding. Men begging. This is war stripped of pretense. And somewhere in that chaos rides King Baldwin. Or rather, he is carried. He cannot pursue like the others. His body is done. But he insists on being present. He watches. And for the first time that day, witnesses say, he looks disturbed. Because this part feels different. Victory without resistance. Killing without risk. There are moments when Baldwin orders his men to stop. Sometimes they listen. Sometimes they don't. You have to understand, command control in medieval warfare is fragile at the best of times. Here, it barely exists. Eventually, exhaustion ends what mercy cannot. Horses collapse. Men can no longer lift their weapons. The pursuit slows. stops. And Montgisard finally goes quiet. Now comes the reckoning. Crusader leaders begin to take stock. Losses are counted. Out of roughly 500 knights, a shocking number still live. Many wounded. Some crippled. But alive. Against all odds. And the scale of Saladin's losses becomes clear. Bodies are scattered for miles. Armor stripped. Weapons broken. Supply wagons looted. The myth of invincibility shattered in a single afternoon. But here is the part history often cleans up. The Crusaders do not immediately follow up this victory. They don't march on Cairo. They don't destroy Saladin's power base. They can't. They are spent. This was everything they had. And Saladin, though defeated, still commands vast resources. Montgisard is a tactical miracle, not a strategic one. And Baldwin knows it. Which brings us to the most human moment of the entire story. That night. The camp is quiet. Too quiet. Fires burn low. The wounded moan softly. Baldwin lies in a tent, his armor finally off, bandages wrapped around hands he can barely feel. A priest sits beside him. Baldwin asks him something no one expects. Why did we live? The priest gives the obvious answer. God. Faith. The cross. Baldwin listens. Then shakes his head slightly. And says, no. Not all of us. He knows. He knows this victory is temporary. He knows his body is failing faster now. He knows Saladin will come again. And he knows, perhaps more clearly than anyone, that Montgisard will be remembered not as a warning, but as a promise. A promise that courage will always be enough. That God will always intervene. That 500 can always beat 26,000. And that belief will kill his kingdom. Now, pause. Because if this story ended here, it would already be one of the greatest underdog victories in history. But there is one more layer. One final twist. Something almost no one talks about. The way Montgisard changed Saladin. Because defeat does not break great commanders. It forges them. In the months after Montgisard, Saladin becomes colder. More disciplined. He tightens command structures. He drills his troops relentlessly. He forbids dispersal during campaigns. He centralizes control. And he never again underestimates fanaticism. When he meets the Crusaders again at Hattin, he will not rush. He will not scatter. He will let thirst, heat, and fear do what swords don't have to. Montgisard teaches him patience. And that patience will destroy Jerusalem. As for Baldwin, his legend grows as his body decays. By the end of his life, he cannot walk, cannot feed himself, cannot hold a pen. But men still kneel when he enters a room. Because they remember Montgisard. They remember the boy who charged when everyone else expected him to hide. And they cling to that memory like a relic, even when it no longer applies. Which brings us to the final question. What did history hide from us? Why is Montgisard remembered as a miracle, but not as a warning? And what does this battle actually teach us about leadership, desperation, and the price of belief? That's where this story truly ends. And that's next. You've been told Montgisard was a miracle. A holy triumph. A moment where God reached down and rewrote the rules of war. That's the version carved into memory. But now that you've walked the field, smelled the blood, felt the panic, you're ready for the truth history usually avoids. Because Montgisard was not a promise. It was a warning. And almost everyone misunderstood it. Let's strip away the poetry and look at what actually happened. 500 knights did not defeat 26,000 men in a clean, honorable contest. They shocked a dispersed army. They exploited overconfidence. They fought with the psychology of men who believed they were already dead. This was not repeatable. This was not sustainable. This was lightning in a bottle, held by a dying boy whose body would never let him fight again. But that's not how people remember it. In Jerusalem, Montgisard becomes myth within months. Preachers retell it from pulpits, each version more divine than the last. Knights tell the story in halls heavy with smoke and wine, polishing their own roles, smoothing out the terror. God will always protect us. That's what Montgisard proves. And that belief is poison. Because belief replaces preparation. Faith replaces discipline. Hope replaces strategy. Baldwin watches this happen. From his litter. From behind failing eyes. From hands that no longer work. He tries to warn them. He urges caution. Diplomacy. Realism. But Baldwin's authority is bound to the very myth that's killing his advice. The leper king. The miracle boy. The living symbol of divine favor. People don't want his caution. They want his legend. And legends don't plan for consequences. Meanwhile, Saladin is doing the opposite. He does not mythologize Montgisard. He dissects it. He interrogates survivors. He analyzes terrain. He rewrites doctrine. He understands something the Crusaders don't. That Montgisard was not proof of God's favor. It was proof of what desperation can do when it collides with arrogance. And he vows never to allow that collision again. Now let's talk about the three human stories that echo longest after Montgisard. First, Hugh of Tiberias. The knight whose jaw was shattered. He survives. Barely. The wound never heals properly. His speech is slurred for the rest of his life. He avoids crowds. He flinches at sudden sounds. People call him a hero. He never corrects them. But he never tells the story either. Because when he closes his eyes, he still feels the arrow break his teeth. Still tastes blood. Still hears the screams. Second, Raymond. The knight who spared a boy, and watched another kill him anyway. Raymond becomes deeply religious afterward. Withdrawn. Quiet. Years later, when younger knights boast about Montgisard, Raymond leaves the room. Because he knows the truth. That victory didn't make them better men. It just showed them what they were capable of. And third, Yusuf. The Muslim soldier whose family never learned what happened to him. There are thousands like him. No name in Christian chronicles. No hero's grave. No monument. Just absence. That is Montgisard's other legacy. Silence. And now, false ending number 3. You might think this is where we step back and judge. Condemn the Crusaders. Praise Saladin. Moralize the bloodshed. But that's too easy. History isn't a courtroom. It's a mirror. And Montgisard forces us to confront something uncomfortable. That under certain conditions, fear, faith, desperation, human beings can push past every limit we think defines us. They can fight without hope. Kill without restraint. Follow a dying teenager into hell simply because he refuses to kneel. That's not noble. But it is real. And that's why Montgisard still matters. Because this battle is not about medieval knights or crusades or relics. It's about leadership under annihilation. Baldwin IV did not win because he was strong. He won because he was already losing everything. His body. His future. His life. When you have nothing left to protect, you become dangerous. Saladin learned that lesson. The Crusaders forgot it. 3 years after Baldwin's death, at Hattin, the kingdom of Jerusalem will collapse. The true cross will be captured. The army annihilated. Jerusalem will fall. And the myth of Montgisard will finally be exposed as what it always was. An exception. Not a rule. But here's the final truth, the 199% of people never hear. Montgisard was not a battle that saved Jerusalem. It was a battle that revealed its soul. A kingdom held together by belief, courage, and desperation. Led, for one incandescent moment, by a boy who knew he would never grow old. King Baldwin IV did not change history because he lived. He changed it because he was dying, and chose defiance anyway. And now you know the real story. Not the polished legend. Not the sermon. Not the textbook paragraph. You know what it felt like. What it cost. And why it could never happen again. That makes you part of a very small group. Because most people remember Montgisard as a miracle. You remember it as a warning. And that, more than banners or crosses or crowns, is what history was really trying to teach.